last week, who are the first groups to show up from England in the New World? What's one of them, Monroe?
The Spanish.
From England.
Wait, are we talking about like?
Just English folks.
Oh.
So you got one group in the South area and one
Wait,
group
are
kind
you
of.
saying like what like the Jamestown colony?
Yeah. So the Jamestown English, which is like the Virginia Company, that's one of them. Here's the ones up north, Braden. The ones up in Massachusetts area, Plymouth area. Should I go to David with the assist? What did you? The Pilgrims? Puritans? Yeah, those ones. Now, the Pilgrims are a little different than the Puritans, but the Pilgrims are there first. So that's the northern colonies. What else did we talk about? We talked about religion a little bit. Kirsten, what's kind of the new religious group that comes on the scene in Europe and they're really going to influence how the colonies take shape, especially those, well, really all of them, but especially the Puritans and the Pilgrims and stuff. It's a certain type of Reformation. David's got you if you like. The Protestant Reformation. So you got like the Christian church splits into two. You've got the Catholic Church now, and you got the Protestants. And both of them are going to be involved in the formation of the colonies. Lydia, what's the trend that we see that kind of repeats over and over? It doesn't really matter where you're at between Native Americans and the English. How do things start? Where do they end up?
They start out okay, and then they go start to get there.
So you have like efforts to, like you have Squanto who helps the Pilgrims, Pocahontas and Powhatan who help the Jamestown people, and there's trade and there's some friendly, Thanksgiving dinner and all that stuff. But then eventually, the difference in culture, the difference in religion, difference in language, the competition for resources leads to violence. What's some of that violence that happens? I don't know. Did we get this in your notes already? There's two wars that I'll probably just like go out multiple choice question and be like, what are the two big conflicts that happen between? It's actually the Narragansett tribe and the Pilgrims. That's who it is. Well, one involves the Pequot tribe. There's a big hint. The Pequot War is one, and then actually it sounds like an English guy's name, but it's not. King Philip's War is the other one. Maybe that's coming up later. Maybe we haven't talked about that yet. So southern colonies, though, down south. And a lot of you mentioned this in your discussion question, did a nice job, but they are, you can make the argument their formation is more shaped by economic goals and motivations. Tobacco really creates the social hierarchy and economic hierarchy in Virginia. John Rolfe introduces that, and you have a lot of plantations that grow tobacco, and it necessitates a big need for slave labor, too. And land. You got to have land for tobacco planting, so you're going to have conflict with that. Native Americans are pushed out, that sort of thing. Maryland is actually founded, it's one of the colonies that's unique in that it's founded by Catholics. And so at the same time in England, there's been all this conflict. Like we talked a little bit about how there's actually a civil war in England between Protestants and Catholics. The whole the background of Romeo and Juliet, the Montagues and the Capulets is this conflict that's existing in England between Catholics and Protestants. So they actually in England passed this act of toleration. There's a college in Virginia called William and Mary, one of the oldest colleges in the country, maybe the oldest. And I was going to wear my William and Mary shirt this week. Well, maybe next section we'll see that, or Friday section. But anyway, so it's Prince William and Mary, and they basically passed this act of toleration in England, and then it comes over and is passed by people in Maryland too, that we are going to be tolerant of people of different faith. So it becomes, what's that a precursor to? This is going to influence things. This is the late 1600s, but it's going to show up again in a big way in a document we'll study in our next unit called the United States Constitution. What am I talking about? What part of our Constitution kind of follows the same mold as the act of toleration, that different religious faith is going to be tolerated? I love that. What? It's an amendment.
Right. I just zoned out for a minute. I was busy writing notes.
which amendment that is? It's the first, yeah, First Amendment. So the First Amendment is going to be, it's part of the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. But yeah, that's going to be a central part of what the United States is founded on, and it starts here in Maryland. The Puritans up north, by the way, not so tolerant of differences in religious beliefs, as we will talk about. Georgia becomes kind of a buffer colony. They actually create, so it's a buffer between the English and Spain. Spain still has Florida, they still have Louisiana, lots of parts in the Southwest and stuff too. So it's kind of this buffer colony to try to, avoid conflict with the Spanish. And most of the people that come there are debtors, people who can't pay their bills in England, so they all go to Georgia to live. Founded by a guy named James Oglethorpe. So again, you have more of a disparity between, there's more men in the southern colonies than up north, like in comparison to the amount of women. But the women that are there do have, and this is worded kind of weirdly, but what I mean by they did have more legal rights, I'm talking about the women. The women in the South had more legal rights than those in the North. So that's kind of a big difference. Partially because a lot of their husbands died, things like whatever, dysentery, disease, and that sort of thing. How is it working?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to record you as you walk around the room? Or?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. Would that be less boring than just looking at a screen?
Yeah.
We got to have high production quality. Like this is,
Well, I feel like when I hold it just at the screen, it's like super bumpy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can follow me around.
With my breathing.
Slow pan. Make sure you get the back of person's head.
Obviously.
Oh, we got. Now we're talking about that. Okay, so a few highlights of stuff in the South. One thing that there is a question on the test about this. It's the headright system and indentured servants. So one way that they get labor outside of slavery is through indentured servants. So people typically would come over, and we're talking about people that are amongst the low economic classes, right? Like you're not doing this just for the fun of it. But you basically, for no money, you are working for maybe a tobacco planter or somebody as a servant, or maybe you're learning their trade. Maybe they're a blacksmith and you're just learning what a blacksmith does. And you're doing it for 7 to 10 years in some cases. So you are pretty much bound to them, right? Like you're not going anywhere. And you have a lot of people that are doing this in Virginia and in the southern colonies. So it gives them a fixed labor supply. But eventually, they would get their freedom to survive that long, that sort of thing. But so you have these people that were indentured servants. Then, after they're done, they're free, and they want some land. They want their share of the pie so they can kind of start building their wealth and that sort of thing. And this leads to some conflict. So what happens is, in Virginia, we have all these treaties with Native Americans. And the governor of Virginia has basically said, I'm going to uphold the treaty. We have this line here, and we're not going to settle past it. The indentured servants, the lower class people, they're looking at the governor and the aristocracy, all the rich people, and they're saying, hey, why can't we have ours? You have all your land, where's our land at? So basically, they get mad at the governor for trying to protect the land of the Indians. And they're led by a guy named Nathaniel Bacon, and they start an uprising. There's some violence that happens, some small little fighting here and there. It ultimately fails because Nathaniel Bacon dies of, I think he dies of dysentery, another one of those common diseases. Do we talk about what dysentery is and how you die from it in here? It's pretty memorable, so we must not know. But dysentery, basically you die of dehydration. Lots of people died of dysentery back then. You can get it through like bad water and stuff like that. But you die of dehydration because your body you just have diarrhea until you don't have any water left in your system. So not a pleasant way to die. But so Bacon's Rebellion basically doesn't work. But what happens is it necessitates a greater need for slaves because basically the people that are rebelling are the indentured servants. And that throws this threat into the labor supply if you're a rich planter type person. That like later on the guys will be like the Jeffersons and Washingtons. They're like, well, we need some labor that we can count on, that we can control, that's going to be here permanently. So you see an increase in slavery after Bacon's Rebellion because that's really stemmed from people wanting. A lot of these indentured servants are rising up against the rich and wealthy people. So that's kind of the big takeaway there. Ultimately, you have two groups that are big losers here. You have Native Americans who lose some of their land, and you have, like people from Africa who end up being more enslaved and brought to the colonies. Yep, up north. Up north in Massachusetts Bay, you've got things they like. They like big traditional families. These Puritans have huge families. Calvinism. Who's Calvinism named after? John Calvin. John Calvin, one of the Protestant reformers, he and Martin Luther. So Calvinists basically believe in something called predestination, that God has ordained from the beginning, like for all time, which people are going to be saved and which people aren't saved. And so it's kind of like a fixed thing. So that's, there's actually like 5 big tenets of Calvinism, but that's one of them. So, and they also believe in hard work, something that becomes known as the Protestant ethic, hard work and whatever, build yourself up. I just threw that in there. I assume they like plain chowder too, because that's kind of the big dish if you go to like a Boston or a, I've never been up to that part of the country. Who's been to like Boston and Maine and any of those places? Anybody? You have? What was it like, Ava?
It was like, we went to Boston, but I was really little, so I don't really remember it. But they had we went to a bunch of like, there's a lot of fish people around.
Yeah. Good to see fishing. Did you go to, did you see the church, like Old North Church where Paul Revere?
I'm sure we did.
Okay.
I was like 8, so
Yeah.
I don't really remember.
You got to pay better attention on things like
Yeah.
that. All right, so things they didn't like, and we'll get into this more too, but obviously Puritans, pretty strict on a lot of religious issues and social issues. This is a theocracy, right? Like their government is very much based around religion. So adultery, not good. What's a heretic? If somebody's a heretic, what does that mean about them? It's kind of a phrase, I think it's a phrase that we throw around sometimes, but David? Yeah, it could be non-believer, or maybe they might consider themselves a believer, but they're teaching like against what people believe is like the doctrine, the rules of the religion, the church. Yeah, so maybe like a false teacher could be, yeah. Outspoken women, we'll look at that in a second, and witches. So the Puritans established Massachusetts Bay Colony. Oh, that's like the same slide. I'm sorry, I don't know. I probably just included it for, we have a nice statue of a Puritan in Boston. Maybe Ava saw it. People to know, John Winthrop. He is the governor for a time in Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he is the guy, so we're going to look at his speech later on, but he gives this sermon, because all these guys are also like, preachers or ministers too. He gives a sermon on how, as the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as a Puritan people, we want to be a city on a hill, and that's from a passage in the Bible, and the idea is that, all these other people will look at us, see how great we are, and that'll draw them to Christianity. That'll draw them to our way of doing things. So yeah, just like we're going to be good role models, is the general concept there. And you could say this is where that idea of American exceptionalism starts. Like we are different. And I think you can also read into that when they say we're different, they also are implying that we're better, and people should be more like us. Later. Other big names in the Puritan faith are Increase and Cotton Mather. Increase is kind of a cool name. If any of you have children someday, you can remember him. And actually, Cotton Mather is the guy we'll talk more about, though, his son. He goes to Harvard. He might also go back to school in England, too. I'll put that back up again. But they're both Puritan pastors, big-time writers. And Cotton Mather is also one of the first guys, and he's inspired by slaves from Africa to start inoculating people against smallpox. And he's like, oh yeah, that works. That's a good idea. Give somebody a little bit of smallpox, and then they don't get a lot of smallpox. And so it's kind of a precursor to vaccination and stuff. Cotton Mather is a very interesting individual. He has somewhat progressive ideas about like slavery and how, basically he says, you have these slaves that are in your family, because slavery exists up in Massachusetts too. Is like these people should be converted to Christianity. You want them to become Christians as well. He's in favor of better treatment, things like that. But he definitely has, the same view that's prevalent everywhere else, where, these people from Africa or Native Americans, they're not really they're not the same level of human as what we white Europeans are. So problematic from that standpoint, or at least we would say so today. And he also is responsible in some degree to some of the witch hanging that's going to go on in Salem. So, does some good things, probably a lot of unsavory things as well, but he is a big name that you'll need to know. Him and John Winthrop. Probably should have put his name in red. Roger Williams. Now he said, we talked about heretics. Roger Williams ends up being called a heretic. They say he is falsely teaching about Puritanism, and so he gets kicked out. If you are a heretic, if you're a false teacher, if you're teaching the wrong doctrine of what they think the Bible means, they exile you. They kick you out of the colony. So he goes and he establishes Rhode Island, a new colony where they have more freedom of religion. He starts kind of a different denomination. The Baptist church was already a thing, but he starts one. He kind of starts a Baptist church down there, and they oppose slavery too. So that's a difference from the Puritans. Roger Williams, a little more. I guess maybe you'd say maybe a little more liberal interpretation of the Bible, but I don't know. In a lot of ways, I think what he views about it probably matches up a little more with what maybe Christianity today would view things as. But he gets kicked out of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he has to go to Rhode Island. One of his buddies is Anne Hutchinson, also a heretic, according to the Puritans. She thinks, as opposed to this Calvinism thing where people are predestined by God, whether they go to heaven or hell or whatever, she thinks that you have some individual free will in that. And you can choose to accept grace from God and salvation, or you can, I guess, reject it. And they kick her out too. Her story ends a little more sadly than Roger Williams, because she has to go live up in New York State away from everybody, and she and her family are killed by Indians. But her descendants, not all of her family I should say, I guess some of the kids survived, her descendants include 2 presidential candidates. I think Mitt Romney was one of those, and I might have to look up the other one. I don't think either one of them won. And a little further south in Pennsylvania, we have the Quakers, and we will talk about them when you come back.